Hey, hey, don't miss the play. Flurry Sports will save your day. Cracking jokes with sports insight. Zach and Jake, they get it right. Fuck yeah.
Hello, welcome back to the Flurry Sports Podcast. Last week, we got lost. We didn't know where we were. Were we in Kansas or India? That was a difficult situation to navigate ourselves out of.
We knew.
We figured it out. But the last week of every month, we're playing nothing but games, but it's all business today, baby. I mean, last time, people have been clamoring. Zach, Jake, discuss more legal things. Get more into the woods here with the legal paperwork in the court system, because you guys explain it better than anybody. Last time we did this, we were explaining the lawsuit with Fox News or Fox Sports, which seemingly nothing has happened and it has been completely swept under the rug.
Yeah.
This time, there's currently live as we are going right now. This is Monday night, so if you're watching this after the fact, they're in the court right now discussing stuff for the NCAA settlement, like a $2.8 billion settlement for former athletes over the past 10 years. They didn't get paid with NIL stuff. And along with it, somehow, I'm not sure how it's the same thing, but they're going to accompany with it the new profit sharing, essentially, between the schools and the players. There's that salary cap. There's some roster confusingness. We are going to go through it all as much as we possibly can. Jake, anything you want to say before we just jump into the basics of this? And this is something I haven't fully looked into, so my live reaction along with y'all in the chat, definitely jump in and give your 2 cents as well.
First of all, go Cougars. We record this on
No.
Come on, go Cougs, win me $50.
Okay. I have a little more on Florida going, so hopefully they win. But
okay,
Houston's just not a basketball school. You know, I like what they've been doing. I like that they're bullies.
Yeah.
Know your role. I don't know what kind of school they are. They're just not really. They need to be good, not great. They're the Wisconsin of the South.
I will say they were kind of what made me think of this topic, because the coach went off about how Duke was from some pink pony. I think he's some weird insult he threw at them conference at the ACC, and how strong the Big 12 is. It's like, okay, what's going on? Do we care where we play? Like, I've never, like, till then, I was like, Houston's proud about being in the Big 12.
The only school, they're battle tested.
Yeah.
And Iowa State, Kansas State, you know how tough it is. You were in the thick of the Big 12 down there. I mean,
I know.
It's a bloodbath.
Well, it's like, on one hand, I was honored, because I was like, stand up for the Big 12. And on the other hand, it's like when the in-law stands up at the family reunion. Is like, I'd like to say something. It's like, you just got here. I love that you like it, but, pretty new.
Yeah. Also, I love kicking the ACC when they're down, though, because that's what we need to do.
Especially in basketball.
For sure.
So that is what made me think of it. Otherwise, just because we teased it last week, we did enjoy a wonderful baseball game this weekend.
We did.
Twins won, and then they blew a 7-1 lead the next day. So we were at the right game.
Okay. Fair enough. It was a little nipply.
Oh, my God.
It was a little cold. You know what? I will say this before we get into everything. Of the 3 baseball games I've ever been to, and I think only 2 were with you. The other one was with the band. It was in the Metrodome. So tell me how long ago that one was. I don't know who won, don't know who played, other than pretty confident the Twins were one of those teams. But other than that, I think this was the game I enjoyed most watching it from a game. And maybe we can talk about this next week. I think baseball's having a moment right now. I think they're doing their absolute best with what they have, and what they have is just baseball, which isn't much. But I'm slightly enjoying baseball. I came into the season with the mindset of trying to like it, and it's kind of working. I think it's enjoyable. I don't want to sit down and watch a full game, which I think most baseball fans would also agree with, which is funny. Like, I've been telling people that, they're like, yeah, why would you? I'm like, oh, I thought you watched every game.
No.
But like, I'm cool with tuning into like the first inning and then like 7, 8, 9.
Well, it's what I've been telling people. It's not a ringing endorsement of the sport. Like, our grandparents were super into baseball, never watched a whole game. They liked it because it was like on all day. To go milk
Sure.
cows, come back in, inning 7. Still got
Right.
the best parts of the game left.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I've been, again, I'm never going to be someone who gets deep into the strategy. I don't care that much about it. But, for what it is, and it is a beautiful sport. I like it. We need to keep those damn torpedo bats around, though. If baseball gets rid of them, I promise I'll be fully out forever, because it's an active decision to not be exciting. So I will be completely out.
We do need to keep them around. And speaking of things we need to keep around, Zach, that's right, the NCAA. I don't know.
Wow.
I tried. I don't know if I believe that. But here's the actual brief I'll give for today. It says in the article, but just because it doesn't go that in depth to it, I'll say it here at the front. It takes a while for this article to get into what the lawsuit is about. And that is because this hearing that, as Zach mentioned, is actively going, that we're going to dive into today, is actually an amalgamation of 3 lawsuits that they've combined together. So it gets into some of the specifics, but if you're like, how come this article just doesn't come out and say what's on the line here? It's because of it's many defendants. There's specific schools that are defendants. The NCAA is a defendant. Several conferences are defendants. So it will have an impact on college sports as a whole. And as it gets into, this is not specifically deciding whether NIL stays or not. This is not like the state of NIL, but it is involving money in college sports. So ride with that, but keep in mind that, like, whatever happens here money-wise, NIL will likely stay relatively intact to what it looks like if it doesn't straight up increase from this.
Yeah. Yeah. At this point, you can't take money out of people's pockets. That wouldn't go over very well. So I'm going to bring an article up here, as is the theme with this season on Flurry Sports, or the Flurry Sports podcast. If you're listening to the audio podcast, God bless you. But head over to the Flurry Sports YouTube channel, Twitch channel. We go live every Monday night, usually around 5:30 to 6:30 Central, somewhere around there. Jump in the chat, watch live, or just watch this after the fact. Go to the YouTube page, Flurry Sports YouTube, click the live section, and the whole podcast will be in there. But we got a nice little article here from Associated Press. So $2.8 billion NCAA settlement goes to the final hearing today. Seismic changes looming for college sports. So let's get into it. This is all happening in California. Basically, the last bit of sports that are happening in Oakland is this lawsuit, it seems like. Final hearing for landmark $2.8 billion settlement will impact every corner of college athletics. Opening Monday, several athletes criticizing the sprawling plan for undervaluing them and leading to a widespread confusion of whether to opt in or not opt into this settlement. That's talking about the former athletes who would be given money for, not being able to collect on their NIL, name, image, and likeness. So the judge is Judge Claudia Wilkin, and she has already granted preliminary approval of the settlement involving the NCAA and the nation's 5 largest conferences. And she gave no indication during the hearing that anything has changed her mind. So we're operating under the assumption she's going to approve this. The new structure would begin July 1st, and it would clear the way for each school to share up to $20.5 million each. So each school would have $20.5 million to pay their student athletes. Give no timeline for the final decision, though, so it's probably not coming today. But important note is that $20.5 million, that's up to the school's discretion, essentially, how they spend it in terms of how everything's worded right now. You can spend it on whatever sport you want. I assume some bit of money has to go to every sport, but there isn't like a set in stone, this percentage to this sport, etc.
They could decide, the article is going to get into this a little bit, but to kind of tease it out a little bit, it does structure out that money is somewhat based on revenue that the school makes from sports, a percentage that could depend based on the judge's ruling. So that will be one of the things that she's deciding on is, Are there any mandates with how it gets spent? Is it based on revenue the sport brings into the school? Is it based on how much money that school has? These are all things the judge could rule on, which is why the last part of that top part of the article goes into detail on. She's basically allowing more testimony, is what they're hearing today. She could have decided on it already, but she's trying. Zach said this before the show. I think the judge is also a little aware of, like, I don't know why I am deciding the whole outline of college sports. So I think she's trying to get as much context as possible of, like, how specific do I rule here today? Because if she just gives a blank statement of you have to pay out this amount with no guidelines, that obviously leaves some specific schools and some specific athletes in the lurch. But it gets more in detail to that, but that's kind of what's the debate here is. It seems like this is going to happen, but the judge could rule from anywhere from yes, it's happening, figure it out, to giving specific settlements on amounts owed.
Yes, bingo. And then it also says the settlement was hashed out last year. So that number essentially by attorneys and defendants, those representing thousands of current and former athletes. Smaller schools say this is going to leave them behind deep-pocketed, donor-heavy programs. And even the proposed guidelines are not expected to calm the huge spending. Now, that is common across college sports. So there are people with issues, as we will get into, including LSU gymnast and millionaire influencer Olivia Dunn, one of the 4 athletes to testify against the settlement. 3 represented Olympic non-revenue sports. And then Benjamin Burr-Kirvin was a linebacker from Washington. So a big money program, big money sport, is also against the settlement, which is interesting and important. Livy Dunn said the settlement should not be approved. She specifically objected to the formula used to set the athlete's NIL value, arguing that hers was estimated too low. In a testimony, she described herself as a Division I athlete, businesswoman, and she is the highest earning female athlete since NIL rules changed. She said the settlement hardly acknowledges her true value and earning power. The settlement uses old logic to calculate modern value. It takes a narrow snapshot of a still maturing market and freezes it, ignoring the trajectory we were on and the deals we lost in the future we could have had. She said the website where athletes could find their damage estimates didn't work at the time of deciding whether to opt in or not. When she was able to get into the website finally on January 31st, she said the data was incorrect. It didn't match what I actually earned, noting she was required to opt into the settlement in order to submit accurate data and that she never heard back from the settlement administrators. That's not surprising whatsoever. So the estimated value for these athletes completely off. That's not surprising. We don't have like their formula of how they, came up with the number. And then the website in terms of how they did it, I'm sure some 60, 70-year-old was creating this website and it didn't even work. So this is the most NCAA thing of all time so far, I would say.
Yeah. And it's like, what I really liked about this article is I thought as best as it could, this is so freaking messy. And I was like, this does as good a job as you probably could of showing how complex this issue is, because you might expect athletes to firmly be on the side of like, let's get this lawsuit to happen. Basically what this lawsuit is saying is universities owe the athletes that are making money for them money directly, not just NIL deals, which are essentially sponsorships, but the school itself owes them money. However, this is where it gets complex. If they settle this as they've established, as Livy Dunn testifies here to, if they opt into the settlement, they are potentially, especially for someone like Livy Dunn, agreeing to what their value is and could lose out on chances to further advocate for further value. Like if she signs a document that says, yeah, I'm only worth so much, she'd lose out on any right to further, challenge for that money.
Yeah. That's not exactly the system that should have been in place. That's insane. So that college football linebacker also spoke. went to have an NFL career before a leg injury, questions the errors in establishing the athlete's value. This is going to be impossible to establish what an athlete's value is, by the way. He said it's within the specific allocation that things get real squirrely. Great way to describe it. I was a fairly decorated football player, and I'm getting paid the same as walk-ons I played with. Then there are kids who I played with who were rotational players who are getting 5 times as much, and we can't find the evidence for why or how they got there. The only thing I think I would push back on that, and again, I don't think anybody knows how they got to this number, which is the issue.
Whole deal. Yeah.
There's zero clarity. But, I mean, does anybody know this guy? I recognize his name, but I don't know who this guy is.
Yeah.
Your accomplishments don't necessarily mean your notoriety or what your name, image, and likeness is worth. Like, there are... I mean, just look at the manager for McNeese State who got a $100K deal. He has no value, no value. He has no value on the court in terms of basketball. He has no name recognition. You can't say his name right now. I can't say his name right now. But like, it's a sponsorship deal. If he's known, it's about clicks, baby. So like, just talking about what your value is in terms of on-field production or awards, I'm not sure if that's going to get him very far. But the fact that there's zero clarity of how they came up with the numbers, obviously that's the issue. And this is anything with sport. How did UNC get in the tournament? It's everything's the same here. Like, there's no clarity with anything.
Yeah, and that's such a good point with him, because it's like him and Livy Dunn are on opposite ends of the spectrum. Yes. And like Livy Dunn, I could also somewhat come in a bit and be like, she's got a really good case. I somewhat understand, like, it's impossible to make a formula that does this, because Livy Dunn, based on her name, image, and likeness, should be making as much money as any female athlete in the NCAA, period. But I know, because it touches on it here, a lot of the folks who came forward Olympic sports, it's very heavily weighted towards what school are you at?
Sure.
Which is the Washington guy's point of like, he's just not going to make as much money as a Washington linebacker as an Alabama linebacker, no matter how good he is. Right. Which, is that good or is it not? I don't know. And to Livy Dunn's point, she's not going to make as much as a football player. But she's way more famous than freaking Kevin Brown. And it's like, but because she's a gymnast, like that, I think is valued differently. And like they're saying, the formula isn't known, but it does talk through, like, all we know is that it's based on revenue earned through the sport. That's what I think is really missing, is it's trying to separate it out from NIL. And I don't think that's super fair to the athletes at all, because, I mean, Johnny Manziel is still the example I think of. And, like, yes, he was good on the football field, but how you made money was putting his name on T-shirts. Like, so it still is NIL.
Yeah. The way she spoke about it initially, in terms of they're using outdated, measurements for a modern thing, I almost guarantee like a very large portion of what the number was derived from is like how many viewers watched their game. 100%. And then there's some multiplier based on it. So gymnast, I mean, everybody knows who Livy Dunn is. I've never tuned into one of her competitions.
Or even worse, ticket revenue.
Guaranteed ticket revenue is part of it too.
Yeah.
So, which is so stupid. Like, how much of it is determined based on their online presence, their social media presence, which is almost all of their value now, especially as an individual. It's 99% of their value. Truly, their accomplishments on the field do not matter. And if it's a team sport, there's no way you can derive like the viewership or ticket sales based on one person. There's just no way you can do that. And again, we're speculating, but I don't know how you do that.
No, that's one section of this. This is almost another section that's about to start. And this was the one where I like sent it to you, because I'm like, this is so freaking messy, but so interesting what they'll decide to do here.
Okay, so the settlement also calls for replacing scholarship limits with roster A limits. The effect would allow every athlete to be eligible for a scholarship while cutting the number of while cutting the number of spots available. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm just reading this for the first time. So they're taking away scholarship limits and then cutting the roster size.
Correct.
A proposal that the judge indicated could be phased in initially, and there will be winners and losers under such formula, though some fear could signal the end of walk-on athlete, obviously, in college sports, and also smaller sports programs that feed the U.S. Olympic teams. Yes, obviously. Stephen Molo, an attorney for the group of athletes objecting the plan, told the judge that roster limits would unnecessarily limit opportunities. He noted that football teams would be capped at 105, and the average roster size in 2024 was 128. In a free market, Molo said a team would be able to have as many players as they want. This is so stupid. Wilkins said she understands athletes not chosen to be on the roster would be disappointed. It ruins their life. But that limiting number of athletes on a team is a matter of fairness. How? Sorry. She's never played a sport.
The next sentence is somewhat helpful, but it's not sports based at all.
It could give some sort of competitive advantage if you have 50 people running around and sub them in every couple of minutes, she said. That's a different scenario than someone who's got 25 people.
So I looked into this a little bit more. I'm not defending her, but here's the thing. Again, this is why she's having more hearings. She's fucked. There's no way to get this right. And I'm not saying that as a defense of this point of hers, but looking into this a bit, basically what she's getting at is essentially, of course, she is acknowledging what you're going to run into is, well, if I open this up and there's no limits at all, then what's to stop? If I don't put a roster limit on it, but say everyone has an access to scholarships, well, then Alabama could offer twice as many scholarships as Maryland. However, she's choosing to cut, people will still abuse this. I understand her attempting to be well, I have to put limits somewhere, but why would you put it here when it's scholarship access, especially to the scholarship access to walk-on athletes or athletes who won't make it professionally seems to me to be the crux of what little moral value we still put on college sports is well, Kevin Browns of the world broke their leg, but at least they still had education paid for. And now it's teams are going to be way more selective of the athletes who get in. So my big takeaway from this, as much as I disagree with this section on the judge's outcome, is I don't want folks to totally forget that this is also a reason to be pissed at the NCAA, who, no doubt about it, is putting all of this in the judge's hands on purpose rather than having them make the regulations.
There's already a roster limit, though.
I know.
Of all the things that everybody's upset with NIL, scholarships, money in general, there's never, ever, ever been anyone who's the football team needs more people. There's already a limit set to the point that there's an average 128 or 124, whatever it said. Why are we reducing it? And by the way, if we reduce it by 20% is what they said, basically, that doesn't affect anything game day. They're talking about, it would be an unfair competitive advantage. That doesn't affect game day roster. That affects the total roster. So you're reducing the number of people you can have on the team that can get paid, which does not affect competitive advantage actually whatsoever, 0%. Yeah. But what you're doing is that means there's less kids who get into school. It's less kids who get to make money. And by the way, having less bodies on the football team, less people to develop, it's going to lead to a worse product, worse money, less money. On top of that, there's going to be less people to do scout team and everything like that, which means the star players, the players who are playing every single week, the ones who you're talking about competitive advantage, they're going to be worn down. They're going to suffer more injuries because you're asking them to do more. So really cutting this, it's leading to more injuries. It's leading to a worse product, and it's leading to no competitive advantage whatsoever. This is someone who doesn't know anything about sports making a sports decision, and 100%. It makes no sense.
No, it doesn't make any sense. It also doesn't make sense. I don't even truly understand. Again, this is where I'm getting really speculative of they mentioned that to me, it seems like maybe this was if her goal is to appease both sides on this, she was hosed from the beginning. Because if her goal was, okay, I'm finding that these teams, these schools have to give out more scholarships or allow everyone on a team to have a scholarship offer or some kind of piece. And then those schools came back and went, well, then you have to make it be less. No, well, then you're not. Then the schools still get what they want. Like, they don't care if it's less. Like, you should uphold both sides of it. You should make them keep same size as they are now.
Yep.
Don't give more opportunity to less people if the whole decision was more opportunities earned here. Keep the size the same. And so I am hoping, because I agree with everything you said. So I'm adding on stuff that is just also there, but note that I agree with it. I'm hoping, and it says in this next paragraph here, one of the plaintiffs states that, like, we can make some of these adjustments as folks are making cases on some of these pieces. And then when it comes out that maybe this part can be removed, because I don't know why roster size has to be a piece of this. I'm missing that no, it doesn't have to be the size. It's also not the number one way they're going to abuse this. If anything, you need harsher limits on how small these rosters could be, because schools will manipulate the shit out of that after this.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
I mean, again,
also, can they just cut sports? I haven't heard it mentioned very briefly, like this will, heavily impact non-major funding sports. Well, like, can schools choose to keep roster sizes the same, but cut several sports? Because that's a competitive advantage.
That's a competitive advantage, or the schools who don't have football already and stuff like that. Like, that's the biggest competitive advantage. You're talking about St. John's, one of the best basketball teams in the country this year. They don't have a football team. How big of a competitive advantage is that they don't have to pay 128 guys on a football team? They can pour all of that into 20 guys for the basketball team or whatever that would be. That's the biggest competitive advantage of all. And I'm not saying that should be changed either. I think that's just the advantage of that school. It is what it is. I'm not going to force them to have a football team. I'm not going to force them to have less money to spend.
It's impossible. It's impossible to do that without giving someone else a competitive advantage. That's why it's silly. Like, it's okay to think about those things, but you're just, if you're going to punish somebody to uplift someone else, you're going to run into the same exact issues that you're facing now.
By the way, it's trickle down too. So we're talking about the 5 biggest conferences right now.
Yes.
So if we did this, we're saying every big school has less players than smaller schools. So then the players who get cut from the bigger schools are going to go to the smaller schools to play. And then all the kids who are currently going to the smaller schools, those opportunities are gone. Yeah. And just because, for no reason whatsoever. It's so stupid.
I don't know if this is the point to interject this, but just to make sure I get it out here too, because I realize I haven't said it yet. I do want to state my overall feelings on this is I'm pissed at some of her decisions, but I am still, like, my main point of anger and frustration is the NCAA, who could have chosen to done a lot of this in a more organized way, or conferences themselves sooner if they wanted to and cared about their athletes making a fraction of the insane amount of profits they make. They could have. I will also say, I guess where I'm landing on it coming into the article, and as I read it today and talk about it more with you, I really respect the athletes who are like, it's not worth passing the settlement as is, and that's really made me think. I think I'm still in the camp, and I don't know if you are, like, I guess my decision is always, what is the NCAA hoping to happen? And I think I want the opposite. And I still think that they're like, please don't let this pass. So I want it to pass in some form, because at the heart of it, I just do think that we have to start somewhere on athletes deserve a percentage of money made off of athletics, not just NIL, but like athletics themselves. And I think this is starting point A. But with everything in college sports, like, I just want folks to remember that there are people incentivized on making this as messy as possible. Like, if this was super streamlined, we'd be done. And then they'd have bargaining rights and everything else. But we're making it super hard on purpose. Getting like that site that does the calculations could be so much better.
Oh, I mean, it could work.
Like,
apparently didn't even work.
Like, what are we doing there? Like that, there's no reason that's bad.
No, it makes no sense. Okay, so we're getting to the end of this first article. So universities across the country have been busy making plans under the assumption that the judge will put those terms that we just talked about into effect. We're going to have a plan going out into July 1st. Then we're probably going to spend next year figuring out how good of a plan that is and how we need to modify it going forward, said Florida athletic director. Yeah, it's so stupid. The so-called House settlement, named after Arizona State swimmer Grant House, includes 3 similar lawsuits that were bundled into one. The defendants are the NCAA and then the Big 5 conferences, the SEC, Big 10, ACC, Big 12, and rest in peace to the Big 12 or the Pac-12, all of whom have been touting the settlement as the best path forward for college athletics landscape in turmoil. It's a huge step forward for college sports, especially at the highest level, said NCAA President Charlie Baker, whose organization continues to seek antitrust protections from Congress. The most ground-shifting part of the settlement calls on schools from the biggest conferences to pay some 22% of their revenue from media rights, ticket sales, and sponsorships, which equals about $20.5 million in the first year, directly to the athletes for their use of their NIL name, image, and likeness. Still allowed would be NIL payments to the athletes from outside sources, which is what triggered the seismic shift in college sports over the past 4 years anyway. So all this is, so we're talking about the PAC or the big Power 5 conferences, Pac-12, Big 12, Big 10, SEC, ACC. Interesting that Big East isn't included, by the way. It's actually really interesting. So the average 22% of the average ticket sales, media rights, and sponsorships equals $20.5 million. So for like Alabama,
per institution, right?
It has to be a blank. They have to have this number has to be the same, $20.5 million
per
so
D1
22
institution. Yeah,
right. So the 22% is the variable part because $20.5 million is much less than 22% of Alabama, but it's probably much more than 22% of like Vanderbilt. So that's a little unfair, but essentially all this is they're saying instead of scholarships getting handed out to the athletes, now the school has to pay $20.5 million every single year to their athletic program. That's all that's saying. But the NIL, the money that the athletes are currently making, that can all stay the same. So this is just $20.5 million of new money to the players. And this isn't profit sharing amongst the teams in the way like sports media rights go. This is just the school. It has to pay out some of the money that they've been collecting this entire time, essentially.
Yeah.
That's all.
And that's
the
part I like. Like that's,
of course.
Right. Like it's like, that's the part in its nutshell I agree with. Yeah. Pay them this fraction. Like you said, some schools for sure are coming on like, well, that's not fair to us because that's higher than our 22%. And then some schools are very much above that. So, but by the way, they could change that up too. Like do conferences pool money and then split it proportionally? Like they could do that. That's all in there. I will one quick plug. If you're in the chat today, thank you so much. As always, thank you, Randy, for telling me how jacked I look. Always a pick me up I look forward to. But if you have questions coming through, let us know. I agree with Randy that we should also get money. That was what I wanted to highlight.
I was missing that part of it. I mean, we should at least get a percent.
I agree with the judge if there's a part in here that says we're sponsored. But I did, so get questions or comments in as they come. I did want to specifically jump in for this next one because it was the one I was like, Zach's going to lose it. The only NIL implication it goes into specifics on is we're getting a clearinghouse involved, Zach. It calls for a clearinghouse to make sure any NIL deal worth more than $600 is pegged at fair market value. Again, on its surface, fine. Clearinghouses are a whole other thing you should look into. But it's appeared to be a challenging set of numbers to settle on. This is an attempt to prevent straight pay-for-play deals. Though many critics believe the entire new structure is simply NIL masquerading as that. Yes, NIL is pay for play. Like, that's the whole deal, is like NIL exists. So schools didn't have to figure out how to pay their athletes directly. So to try and separate that out from this, that's going to be a freaking nightmare. Like, $600 is an interesting line to set it at. I'm curious about that too. But again, at its heart,
that's tax. That's just a tax thing.
Yeah.
Because it's got to be, this is all like, it's individual income. So like the number already for like my taxes, even like if I get more than $600 for a thing, I have to report it. Yeah. So I'm guessing it's listed at 600 because of that. But it's saying any NIL deal worth more than 600, they're gonna scout it out and sniff it out and just make sure it's fair. Like, first off, if it's football, if it's basketball, which is really the only two sports we're talking about, because those are 95% of the money essentially. That's just a number I pulled out of the air. That's probably high, but you get the point. All those deals are worth more than $600, and we've already got history from 2 scrolls up saying that they don't know how to make formulas pegging value. So now they're going to determine what's fair market value on current players, and what a current player is doing today is different than tomorrow. It's nothing. Like, if they say that's not fair market value, they have no idea. Like, that's going to be a complete nightmare. There's going to be zero clarity in that. That's so stupid. The proposal would pay more than $2.5 billion back in damages as well for athletes who played sports between 2016 and 2024 and were not entitled to the full benefits of NIL at the time when they attended schools. Those payments are being calculated, again, by a formula that will favor football and basketball players because they made all the money, and will be doled out by the NCAA conferences. Plaintiffs' counsel Kessler told the judge 88,104 college athletes have filed claims to participate in the settlement. Another 30,000 have indicated that they will file claims. So, Jake, let me know if I'm right on this. Maybe so they picked 2016 for a reason. 2015, who's in the class of 2015 who just missed out on it? I do believe we're talking about Jameis Winston and Marcus Mariota, who would have made so much fucking money. And I believe the year after that was nobody. It was like Jared Goff was the first overall draft pick. So,
for what it's worth, every year you could do this, a big sports year for NCAA, just because it's fresh on the mind. I agree with you 100% on the football players. And they're not the only ones who get screwed on this, but you know who would have made so much goddamn money and did for folks is by school. I don't think there's been a group of folks who's made more money randomly for school than the 2015 Badgers basketball team did.
True.
Like,
that's very true.
Taking the comparison, like, Alabama always makes money. That's what I mean by that. Like, the Badgers basketball team does not always make money. And it was like every other school besides Kentucky's favorite basketball team was that group of Badgers.
They're on Sports Illustrated cover.
And they won't get any of this. Neither will that slime bag at Duke who kicked people.
Grayson Allen.
Grayson Allen. I'm so sorry. That was Rudy's.
You don't need to apologize to Grayson Allen. Yeah. That's fine.
But you nailed it. I want to answer some questions in the chat as we go because we got some big ones in. Randy on the we're going to cover that one by go because that's a big one. Some quick ones from Randy. The amount of money athletes get separately will depend on this formula that we've been talking about. And effectively, this would not only pay a certain past percentage of players that we're talking about from that 2016-2024 range. Assumedly, this formula would hold going forward until it was adjusted or impacted by, I guess, the NCAA, or would it take a court order to change this formula again? That's a question. And then I have Houston tonight. Zach's rooting for Florida. But the big question is from Goat there, which I really appreciate you jumping
going back
in.
to Randy, there's 2 parts here. So I'm assuming you're talking about not the past athletes, you're talking about future.
Yes.
So that $20.5 million, they get to, at the moment, separate it out however they want to separate it out. But then NIL, so all the money that they are currently receiving at the current moment with how it's designed is that doesn't even change. So it's just how much is your new contract essentially worth with the school? That's new money. And then all this NIL money should stay the same. However, I can almost guarantee, I don't have like insider knowledge of this at the moment, but I can almost guarantee there's going to be like those collectives for schools that are created by the school where a lot of that NIL money is coming from right now. Those will get taken away. Yep. And they're just going to rely on that 20.5 million. So at that point, I don't know. They're going to have to rework all these contracts. And that's the biggest issue right now, I think, in NIL. Like, there is no contracts. There's kids getting absolutely screwed, and there's no like framework on anything. And that's the big part that's going to have to get figured out after they figure out the money that they have to work with.
Well, and to Goat's question, one of the impacts there just directly tie from it, and he had a follow-up one of any new info today. One of the things that the judge is open hearing on is testimony from Livy Dunn. So they could, one of the things I think they would obviously be ruling on is that NIL piece is, does your NIL worth impact this formula or should it? And so that's been one of the things I think has been most in the air. Yeah. To Goat specific thing, I'll read it out for folks. I'm a part of the class action for Power 5 football, but my last year was 2018, so only eligible for 1 year. My estimate payout is $43,000. And then later they add in, I have teammates 2 years younger with payouts of $250,000. That to me, Goat, first off, that sucks. I'm so sorry. That really stinks.
No kidding.
I would say the new info is that apparently these settlements that were thought to be, everyone's been acting like this is going to go into effect, as we've explained. The judge has reopened it. So this is going to happen, but could there be changes to it? That's actively being discussed, and we might go into any live updates here for you. But I would say to that point there that you're really asking about is I do think what could change, and what they've discussed specifically in there today, is that year range that you're talking about. Is we see some places say 2016, some places 2018. If they change that, that could impact the amount of money folks make. They could also impact this formula of like, when they say percentage of income, to Zach's point, like that 20.5 million is set, but they could decide, how well did your team do that year? Should that make an impact? Like, schools have that right when it comes to past athletes. That seems to be up in the air yet. So those are some of the things we're talking about. But sorry about, just how shitty it is that payout difference is so much. But we appreciate you sharing some of that info because it's super helpful to talk about.
For sure. So let's get into the live updates here. USA Today has those. Right off the bat, the judge said she would not be ruling today. So I guess that's an important point to just say right off the top. And again, we're looking at this for the first time. So excuse me as we jump around here. The judge says she needs a pro-competitive justification for the proposed system under the settlement that would set up a more stringent evaluation by the NCAA and conferences of the athletes' NIL deals that are worth more than $600. That is, how would this promote competition for athletes' NIL services, and how would it not hurt athletes? Mm-hmm. I will say, as much of a doofus that I think this judge is, and she knows nothing that's going on in terms of how sports operate, I appreciate that she's at least like listening to feedback and like actually seemingly open to ideas, right? Yeah. Like, she's open to listening to the people who know what they're talking about. I like that. That's something that maybe we can we should implement that more in decision making in terms of government. That's all I'm just going to say.
Yeah, I think this next quote is pretty telling, right? I think the NCAA coming out in such strong support of the current settlement, again, is a red flag for me. Anytime they're like, do it. She even says she's asking NCAA lawyer Rakesh Kearu, sorry if I butchered that, about due process issues for future college athletes. And he's rejecting her idea of having the possibility of different rules for different class years. So that goes to what we were talking about with Goat. Like, of course that should, why wouldn't it be different year by year? Like,
we need a 10-year agreement, he says. Like, brother.
Yeah.
Like, what's 2035 going to look like? The NCAA is not going to exist. That's all you're trying to do is save them.
Well, and that's the whole thing. That's why I totally get Livy Dunn and some of these other folks. Like, to lock into this with, I hope what the judge is really fighting for, which is so fair, this should not be locked in. This has to be adjusted. And not by her. I don't blame her being like, why me? Like,
right.
Why am I the final decision on this that's never had a decision before?
So the NCAA's lawyer says we need a 10-year agreement. There's got to be the same rules for everyone. We need 10 years. Without that, there won't be stability. There won't be a deal. The judge says, go over it again with your people. There are rules. It may be technical, but there are rules in the law of concerning due process. So she says, hey, go fuck yourself. And then now he has to go do that. The judge's idea on dealing with roster limits. This is the one I guess I'm most upset about. Yeah. She returns to the issue of this, saying, my idea is grandfathering. So it's not that many people. It's not that much money. She added, it would be a goodwill move that would resolve a lot of the drang. So she's just saying, we're going to make the rule of the roster limits, but everyone who's currently on roster, they're just going to be grandfathered in and be good to go. Wilkins suggests that to the NCAA's lawyer, and he says, I'll talk to my client, get back to you. Great.
And then he pushes back. Drama.
Yeah, I know. Drama. That he smacked her. He says, independent of the settlement, a coach could cut an athlete at any point and could renege a roster spot commitment to a high school recruit as long as an athletics scholarship commitment is honored. He continues that roster limits are part of the overall settlement, and the issue before the judge today is whether the overall settlement is reasonable. He adds that roster limits in combination with the lifting of all scholarship limits increases competition and opportunity for athletes. It's a benefit for them. He adds that the roster limits were not reached arbitrarily, but based on the total number of athletes who actually participate in competitions in the various sports over the course of the season. I agree on that part. I agree on that part with him and the NCAA. There shouldn't be, there should be a roster limit. I just don't know why we're fucking touching it. Like, it should just be what it is currently. In addition, he says roster limits, the roster limits issue affects a small number of folks compared to hundreds of thousands covered by the settlement. Okay. Yeah, I guess. But yeah. Judge pressing lawyers about claims of future college athletes. The judge is asking questions about how future athletes' interests would be represented under the 10-year settlement being proposed. The plaintiff's lawyer, Jeff Kessler, explains that incoming athletes annually will be presented with a notice of opportunity to raise objections with the court. Of course they would. They would be advised to consult a lawyer or a parent. This would allow athletes and or a judge to respond to changes in circumstances in college sports. This would mean future athletes' rights are not being bargained away. That's good. We think this is a totally consistent with due process. The judge seems reluctant on the issue whether there are legal precedences. I understand the question. The plaintiff's lawyer says he thinks the annual review would cover the issue. Then the enemy, Rakesh Kalaria, comes in.
The same thing. Yeah.
He stormed in from the shadows. Attorney for the NCAA reiterates that the future of college athletes will be able to come before a court in the same way that current and former athletes have been able to come before the court, which is what, Rakesh? None?
Well,
like this is the issue, brother.
Yes. And it seems like where his line in the sand is the NCAA's line in the sand, not to bury it all in this lawyer who's a mouthpiece, but
yeah,
you suck too, Rakesh. But they don't want, which I understand in a vacuum. I'm not rooting for them, but I guess I get it. What they don't want is it to become a process in itself where students could, within their school or whatever, object to this. They want there to be enough barriers where every time they think they're not getting paid what it is, they have to make a legal case out of it. Well, that obviously limits the number of objections they're going to get, rather than the NCAA having to, I don't know, police their own bullshit, because that would be new for them to try and do that. So That's dumb. I also think Goat said this way earlier, but this for sure is going to spawn into several lawsuits. I mean, we're going to have a whole chain of not only future years, but if they come out and they say, we get a clearinghouse out here to come and say, well, these NIL deals were fair or unfair. I mean, you're going to get all these folks come out and say, well, my NIL deal was for sure not fair by these new standards. Mm-hmm. Where's my money? Yeah.
By the way, everybody's value is going to be unfair.
Do you think, I was wondering this because I was, I always get a little suspicious when the NCAA supports any part of this. The NCAA seems supportive of some independent agency coming in and saying, here, this NIL deal was fair or unfair. Uh-huh. Do you think this leaves the door open? I think it does. And that's shitty as well. Do you think this leaves the door open? Like, I'm an athlete. I sign a NIL deal with that, I don't know, Hooters. And I'm a really good basketball player, and then I break my fucking leg. Do I owe Hooters my money back?
Like, see, that's the whole thing that I'm most concerned about. And this current situation isn't getting, this doesn't really cover that. Just the contracts of college athletes, how that's going to be figured out. That's what needs a complete overhaul and needs restrictions, because that's still the Wild West. Like, there needs to be, whether it's a per game paycheck, whether it's, whatever it is, that needs to be very much specified. And especially this first wave, this first few years, like, kids are essentially representing themselves. These random ass agents that aren't really, they're just pop-up agents just trying to collect a quick buck. They're predators on these kids and signing all these terrible deals. The people handing out the money are signing terrible deals. It's, it's going to be,
that money will be long gone. It's like, it's also the point of the point of this shouldn't be the NCAA clawing back as much money as they can. Listen, that's how contracts work. That's the NCAA doesn't want to end up in a situation where money's guaranteed. But that's how sponsorship goes. Like, do you think Livy Dawn's sponsors give a shit how she finishes at the, meets she does, or that she's just Livy Dawn, Like, and
she's a bad example, I think, but I get your point.
Yeah.
I think they do, though.
They care to an extent, but I think there's a piece of them that makes the same money. I'll use the McNeese manager. They care to an extent, but they make the same money off of them somewhat regardless of what they do on the court. Obviously, they are going to pay folks who are more known for their output more than others, as they should. But
it's like I was saying before, they that Washington linebacker is the one who spoke up saying,
correct,
I make less money than people who are less accomplished than me. What you do on the field is partially included in what your personal value is, but it's not all of it. And social media is the biggest thing. There's a lot of people huge on social media that are not talented. They suck. They are whatever they are. But they're valuable because it's all about clicks. It's all about views. It's all about all of that. So Livy Dunn's a bad example just because, again, I have never watched one of her competitions, and almost none of her target market has either. But she is very popular. So they don't care about Livy Dunn's. It's like the their name because I think they're signed to WWE, but the twins down in Miami who played basketball for 20 years. I don't think they were good at basketball, but it is what it is.
That's 100%. I don't know their name, but I agree completely. I think as you were saying it, I found my articulation, which is 100%. Now that you've said it, I'm like, what they need to do, and they're just not there yet, is exactly what Livy Dunn, I guess, is articulating for. And despite her case not being the best one, however they calculate this has to somewhat include name brand value, because
it has to.
Yeah, because on one hand, exactly what you're saying. On one hand, the guy from Washington maybe didn't make as much money as, Monte Teo or whoever, who's obviously bigger name value. But on the other hand, Kevin Ware, I can tell you his name.
Yeah.
Should my boy Kevin have gotten a Mayo Clinic sponsorship? I like to think so. We could have gotten a whole rehab spinoff. Right now they're trying to separate that out. I was just going to tie in won this other paragraph. Rakesh gives the game away. We were alluding to it earlier.
Yeah, this next paragraph.
100%. The judge literally asked, could I approve part of the settlement, but not the others? And Rakesh says, nope. No. The NCAA would like you to approve it in bulk, which, I mean, that's what they're going for, right? So very interestingly, because we haven't talked about it, and just to put it in quick, has not yet decided the role of the college football playoff. You mentioned that earlier, that being a separate entity from the NCAA. I think that will be very, very telling, because here's what you got to know, folks. If they decide the college football playoff is separate from this, well, then there goes March Madness. They'll separate that out too, and then we'll have everything separated from the conferences themselves.
Right. I mean, college football playoffs is a separate entity from NCAA, and it's the first step of college football forming its own league and getting separate from the NCAA, which is going to happen. And if March Madness does the same thing, college basketball can separate themselves from the NCAA. Boy, the NCAA has no power anymore, which is what we are all shooting for. Goat, really quick, I do have a question for you, since you are more personally like intertwined with this. In terms, like, I'm trying to figure out in my personal mind, like, what is the best way to frame college contracts and these deals going forward. And there's pros and cons to absolutely everything. So my idea does not have, it's not like has zero cons, right? But in my mind, doing a 2-year contracts with all of these players, I feel like that's the way to do it. So like if these schools are signing on these kids out of high school, it should be a 2-year contract. So they're not hopping in transfer portals willy-nilly, but it also provides the kids some stability. And the contracts coming from the school, obviously very different than NIL. So it wouldn't be performance-based. It wouldn't be game-based. It wouldn't be anything like that. But then you have a 2-year deal with a kid that you just signed from high school. So freshman, sophomore year. And then, you know what? That contract's up. Can they hit the transfer portal and find another 2-year deal? And that doesn't diminish or get rid of the fact that they could go to college after 3 years, talking football or whatever. For basketball, you can opt out of the deal and go to pro. You would probably forfeit X amount of money. It's probably paid out as a year-by-year basis, but the contract itself is a 2-year deal. I feel like that is a pro to the school. It's a pro to the sport in terms of people wanting to get rid of the hopping in the transfer portal every year, but it's a pro to the kid as well, because there's a defined amount of money and you have have it be fully guaranteed, assuming you stay with the school, right? Or stay in the sport. Like, I think that helps everybody. And it's the same as a scholarship, essentially. Like, that's how I feel like it should be designed.
Yeah, I'll talk until Goat types in if they're still around. Hopefully they are. But I think how they'd want that framed for a contract is huge. Some natural things that will pop up. I love that. I think this is how I know I really like it, is because I think what will immediately happen is then the NFL will get involved. And that's how you know you're on the right level, because they'll go, what do you mean you're guaranteeing money?
True.
Because we don't want to do that. And so Goat says in there, definitely a pro, but if someone brings more money, they'll probably dip out. And that is another wrinkle that I have to think of it. I love that, Goat, because...
But that has to be in the... That's what I'm saying. They'll dip out after 2 years, but the 2-year deal is the 2-year deal, is what I'm saying.
And it ties into the transfer portal. They wouldn't be able to transfer during that contract, which they need anyway. Separate to this, they need limits on transferring.
Yes, this is a partially side thought. I was just curious because he's in it.
Yeah, I would also be curious if Goat has any insight on, as someone who's a former athlete in all of this, do you care at all what happens next? Not in like insincerely, because it's like I'm a little like it makes me think slightly, and sorry to bring this in if folks don't think it's the same thing, but it made me think of the argument of like college student loan forgiveness, which is they basically did several separate polls where it's like forgiving future college loan forgiveness was a whole lot less popular than forgiving stuff that's already happened, because everyone who'd already paid for it was like, what the fuck? What about me? So I didn't know if there were any thoughts there of like, that feels like these should be two separate cases, like pay folks like Go and everyone else what they made, And like, let's also set up a future thing for this.
I'm sharing in the chat. If you do want to share any more about like what you're going through or like other things
or anyone
like
else as well,
former teammates are going through.
Yeah.
I just dropped my email there. If you ever want to connect, I could either write a story about it on my site, or if you just want to talk about it, I won't share anything as well. That's fine as well. But that's my email, and then Fantasy Flurry on Twitter. Let me know if you ever want to connect and talk about this and share anything. Can be anonymous, can be public, does not matter. But I think that would be very interesting from somebody from your point of view. Yeah. And he also says he was pre-NIL, so I think 2 to 3 years after NIL was added, so not really. But yeah, if you have anything, yeah, fair enough. If you have anything you want to share, go for it.
Yeah. And appreciate all the input today. It's been awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Possible impediment to the judge's final approval. Another objector group's lawyer, Andrew Ellis, started making a presentation. The judge immediately redirected him towards the issues of illegality of the settlement as it pertains to the future of athletes, since it was a proposed settlement that would be for 10 years. The judge says, can you have a class of future people who aren't known yet? Can you release claims for things that haven't occurred yet? The judge says that in his view, the only way to achieve this would be for there to be a separate set of lawyers working to represent those interests rather than the current situation in which the plaintiff's lawyers are representing current athletes, former athletes, and future athletes.
Yeah. Separating the timescales of this, which it sounds like the judge would be in favor of too, maybe.
Yeah. Judge accepts this view. It would be a major impediment to her granting final approval. And then they break for lunch. Isn't that great?
Title IX. She's skeptical. Here we go.
Me too. The judge is skeptical of Title IX. Objector's lawyer is representing 4 female athletes, including lacrosse star Charlotte North. She argues against how little the damages would go to women. The judge says, we can't solve all these problems retrospectively. It's too bad, but ... Hence there. The argument from objectors here is that the schools have been allowed to pay NIL payments to athletes absent from the restrictions. Those payments would have been subject to Title IX gender equity requirements. But yeah, she's just saying, it's focused on football and basketball. It is what it is. Those are the big money makers. Those are the people who are missing out on money. And the female athletes, of course, are being like, hey, what about us? It would have been under Title IX. They're saying, nah.
And I like to be a little kind to her. She's basically like, I can't do that today. Which
I'm not a miracle worker.
Yeah, I'm a little sympathetic too. But I do think it kind of also cuts to the heart of this, which is, listen, Title IX is a piece of it. But along with that also is the reality of how much of this is specifically tied to how much money that sport made. Because if that's the case, then I don't think it makes us look a certain way to say the male sports make more money. It just does. So as a generality, talking that broadly, obviously there's exceptions like Livy Dunn or specific schools like Nebraska volleyball makes a shit ton of money and probably outperforms, Nebraska baseball. But like as a rule, Title IX's not going to come in and be like, you have to pay everyone the same based on gender, based on income. That's not what's happening. It's income revenue based, or at least I think that's part of the formula. I guess we don't know,
Yeah. Interestingly here, we got some corruption on their side now, the plaintiff side. So Washington football player that we talked to before and Livy Dunn are both saying that the plaintiff's lawyers want to get their fees and move on. They just want to go back to work. Livy Dunn again talks about that the damages, the number that was given to her doesn't come close to recognizing the value that she lost. Not a personal detail, but a warning sign. I knew the numbers were wrong and I had proof. She said the plaintiff's lawyers that are overseeing the damage distributions are receiving hundreds of millions in fees, as much as $775 million over 10 years based on their filings in court. They don't know the data being received. So they're just there to collect nearly $1 billion. And
Yeah.
that is that. That's not really,
No.
surprising.
Also, just to highlight this question again from Goat, we did not join the Zoom call today, but this article that folks can find from USA Today is a breakdown of live updates, I think mainly from that Zoom call. So if you want to follow this is what this article is pertaining to.
Yes. And now my girl Graceland Laudermilch, sick name, she says no one can explain why. Honestly, no one can explain why roster limits are good. Bingo. Thank you very much. She's a high school runner from Pennsylvania, appearing today without an attorney, badass, because there's no one representing her interest in the settlement. I understand. Let me do it. I'll help you out. As she wrote in her filed objection, she made a decision among several colleges, and then the coach then told her that there would not be a spot for her. She did not identify the school. No one can explain to me why roster limits are good for anyone. And addressing the judge, she says, our future is in your hands. I love a good guilt trip. Thank you very much. Another athlete speaks, Utah swimmer. Utah swimmer Gannon Flynn, speaking about roster limits as well, says that because of the proposed roster limits, athletes are already being told to transfer or quit. He calls the proposed limits cruel. And I'm sure the judge would then just talk about the grandfathered in rule. But still, I don't think it's a good thing. Citing participation data collected by the U.S. Department of Education, Flynn says that more than 5,300 athletes will lose their roster spots under the proposed limits. He says this is not taking into account that teams that could get dropped. Bingo. And he cites that recent decisions by Cal Poly to drop swimming and Virginia to drop diving. So yes, 5,300 athletes probably won't lose their jobs, right? Because of the grandfathered in rule. There will be programs that drop out right away that will cause those cuts, but we're talking about 5,300 future athletes that won't have those spots then.
Yeah, spots I think don't exist. Yeah,
it's just as important. What's at stake today, and we kind of already went through this. So the $2.8 billion in damages, those favorite football and basketball, men's obviously, not Caitlin Clark. She got that money. Other things, Title IX, big deal. Sports by sports scholarship limits, replacing them with roster limits. We talked about no ruling today. What will be addressed today? Lengthy stuff.
Oh, that's interesting. That 88,000 who've accepted settlements or claims is only about 30% of those eligible. That is really
that's
telling.
Tough.
Yeah,
that is telling. Ted Cruz has emerged from the darkness and is prepared to introduce a bill that will provide immunity. However, Cruz has not gone beyond discussion of the draft, provide limited protection from schools. He's kind of heading up this whole thing, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still kind of the same stuff here.
It also paints it in a perspective like it's important to remember that, again, the big incentive here is the NCAA wants this passed now. They've already agreed to this settlement. They have acknowledged they have to pay some. They have to pay something. They've already lost that particular case. They are trying to get out of this with, of course, which I mean, this anyone would do. They're trying to get out of this basically as unscathed as possible. That's why I think it's kind of bullshit that the roster piece has to be in there, because they're basically saying, well, if you're going to make us pay people, at least let us pay less people. It's like, well, isn't that the whole deal? Is that you have to pay the same amount? But I will be interested, since the judge has opened this up so much, if she's going to toss it to another court now that everyone's ready to do this by July.
Yeah. So, a lot of this is about roster limits here right now. The judge has questions about the future, saying the 10-year-old playing kickball in the asphalt would not be aware of this settlement, just talking about the roster limits.
Cool. Love the metaphor.
Yeah, same here. She thought about that one during lunch. The NCAA lawyer, Rakesh.
The 10-year-old playing kickball on the asphalt. There's not a whole lot of kickball scholarships out there. you could think
True.
of any of the sports you were representing today.
That's what I'm saying. She doesn't know what's going on.
She goes through and she adds in a clause that says every school's got to have a kickball team. That's kind of what I want.
For some reason, I pictured not her saying that quote, but that detective from Knives Out, as thought, Foghorn Leghorn or whatever his name is.
Listen to this. You're going to love this. She gives Rakesh a piece of her mind.
Okay, so Rakesh is arguing in favor of the settlement, extols the virtues of scholarship limits being eliminated in favor of roster limits. The judge cuts him off. Love that. Says that's small comfort to the ones who don't get the roster spot or the scholarship. She expresses particular concern for the athletes who have made school choices based on having roster spots available and then being told unceremoniously that they wouldn't have one. Kilaru says it's the settlement as a whole that's at issue.
Yeah.
He says you wouldn't have the revenue sharing through school NIL deals with athletes without roster limits. Judge asks about phase in for roster limits. Kilaru continues talking about the merits of no scholarship limits versus roster limits. The judge asks whether there could be a grandfathered in period essentially again. The attorney responds that's not part of the settlement deal. That's required not only negotiations with plaintiffs, but to get the schools to agree to it. Blah, 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 blah. Steve Molo, a lawyer for a group of objectors, says that he is not here to blow up the settlement, but it needs to be fair. He argues it isn't with regard to the start of roster limits. In a free market, he says schools can have as many as they want. The judge says, why? Isn't there a competitive advantage problem? He says, nah. She says, do you want scholarships or roster limits? He said, neither. So that's not going anywhere.
Yeah. And then some of those other pieces aren't getting traction, which is also why I think the roster limits are there. And just to keep shouting out the chat, Go said something funny, which is 30%. My payout is going up. That will also be the question: is it just whoever claims gets a bigger piece of the pie because they've already established how much money? I don't think so, but
they got a formula to determine how much you're worth. They got it already figured out.
And then from the sounds of it, it's fucked. But hopefully the formula's got to be fixed. I've been waiting for them to come up. But listen, no one likes the roster limits. Neither do we. I mean, that's coming across in all these pieces here. And I hope she sees that and goes, that has to be separate from this case. And I know the NCAA is trying to keep it desperately part of that, but that seems to be where we're at right now on this case. That's the most recent update. But I guess, Zach, as we get to the end of that update article there, what are your thoughts? And folks in the chat can jump in too. Like, what are your thoughts on, is our hope here that this passes? Is our hope here that this is altered before it passes, or somewhere in between, or something else?
At the moment, it sounds like the judge can't do part of it. Like, it's either all or nothing. So my hope is it does not pass at the current moment. Like, it has to be tweaked. There's so many, as with anything, like there's little things that get snuck in under the big issue. And the roster limits thing was kind of snuck in, and everyone's like, wait a minute. No, absolutely no one's in favor of that. As we can see at the end here, there's another objector in roster limits. There's somebody before that who also objected. He just didn't explain himself well. And the judge said she wasn't following what he was saying. But obviously the school needs to share revenue that they're making with the players. I think that makes sense. Then after that gets agreed upon, and I think the number it seems like is already agreed upon, then that's step one of like many. At that point, then they have to figure out what does that look like and how are these contracts constructed? Who's creating these contracts? We have so many schools now and individual programs hiring an athletic director, or not an athletic director, a general manager rather. Like a lot of that's falling under them. But there's going to have to be one person working with the athletic director who's just the, not money manager, but they're kind of just the finance manager who's constructing these deals, signing these deals, and they have to be very transparent for these athletes. That's going to be the next big step after that. So hopefully then that number can at least get agreed upon before summer, you know what I mean? Or before the next fall. And then that process can start. But at that point, I think revenue share needs to happen. It needs to be set. Roster limits doesn't make sense. Just have it be a specific set number that we already have. And then schools can determine what they want to do with it. But then there needs to be security in place for the athletes in terms of how these contracts are made. And then finally, we can finally have some sort of NIL that makes sense. But it sounds like we're going to jump into this next new chapter of NIL with even less restraints and even less. I mean, I read this earlier. There's already 2 schools that have announced once this, I think it's Colorado, which made no sense. And then another one, once this gets passed where the school has the revenue share, the $20.5 million, they're going to get rid of the collectives that they created, which is the thing that is the NIL for their school. Yeah. So they're replacing it with the $20.5 million. So theoretically, that's worse off for the player and it's less money for the player. That makes no sense too. So
and that's what the NCAA wants out of this, is that piece of it. I guess my hope is that this can pass with the common sense pieces added to it. And I don't know if that's possible, but it seems like everyone involved should want the formula to be fixed. Yeah. And I say fixed in the sense of you're still going to have outliers, like Livy Dunn, I believe, will probably remain an outlier, but it has to better incorporate brand value, for lack of a better term, and it has to better incorporate like their actual generated revenue. Like from the sounds of it, it's so random. Well, based, on school and different pieces that, because otherwise, and I guess this is the least they could do. I'm also imagining your contract suggestion of, can we start on the path to, at the very least, folks could separately sue if they weren't given the right amount? Could we set up what is the arbitration process for this? I feel like that has to be established when this passes. I can't just, if we set this up with another court date in 10 years, that's not helpful either. And also my last piece on it with your contract piece is these folks are employees. They should have employee rights at this stage. Like, we're still dancing around. It started at the very beginning of the first article we read. The NCAA is desperately trying to get antitrust rights in different pieces because they want to beat the athletes to the punch of, oh shit, you have legal rights as employees now.
Well, the biggest issue with this whole thing is that it's 3 lawsuits in one.
Correct.
So I think what they kind of figured out, the $20.5 million, the revenue share thing, I think that's good. Great. If we could pass that today and that's it, great. Yeah. I think the determining the value and paying out NIL damages essentially to the former players of the past decade or so, that needs to get tweaked because there needs to be more clarity and needs to be represented proper value better. And then just going forward in terms of how they spend the money and roster limits and all of that, that needs to get better. So there's like 3 huge chunks to this thing. And obviously the NCAA is like, you got to pass it all at once. If you want this one huge thing, which is common sense and everybody's saying yes to, then you got to sign these other 2 things to bail us out. And hopefully somehow there's some solution, like you said, to get to this end passing where we don't have to give in to the NCAA for these other bullshit things, and not have a 10-year deal, by the way. That's stupid. I just don't know if that's going to happen. If that somehow happens, then this is going to get drawn out for over a week for sure.
Yeah. And maybe that's where we're at with it. Who knows? Because what I don't know is if the judge is also surprised at how not well this is currently set up. I don't know,
surprised all of us, really.
So it's interesting. I appreciate all the discourse on this today, both obviously from us, always a good combo, but appreciate all the input on chat. I think my last thought with it too is pass the shared revenue. Also, I think not every athlete's going to love this, but yes, pass bringing in a clearinghouse to freaking evaluate. That has to be edited and shouldn't be. Correct. None of this, even the $20.5 million, I hate that is even stamped, can't be altered, can't be changed. Like all of this should have more flexibility than it seems it has. But I do understand. I'm hoping that is a pathway into NIL needs more structure.
Has to, yeah.
And if that's a starting point for it, then I'm on board for that. But
yeah,
I don't love it as is, but I wish those two pieces could happen right now. Also, no one, and everyone's coming out of the woodworks. We got a swimmer from Utah. We got a football player from Washington. No one likes the roster size cuts. We got a random runner from high school.
Yeah, she's a badass too. I liked her.
Yeah, me too. So it's like no one likes these except Rakesh.
Yeah, that son of a bitch. He's back at his home hanging from the ceiling right now with his arms crossed. I hate that guy. But your point with the clearinghouse, I think the general purpose of what I'm giving them a lot of credit. The general purpose that what they're trying to accomplish with it is good. And what that is just there is some general overseeing body that is making sure the players don't get fucked over with a deal. And if that's all it is, that's great. But they're already proving they can't determine what proper value is. So
yeah,
the issue is they're not determining proper value with their own money that they're paying out. I think they're going to be better at determining proper value with these independent things if they're not paying the money. And hopefully this is the next issue. Hopefully the clearinghouse doesn't take a percentage where it's like every NIL deal that the player brings in. Hey, obviously we're making sure we're covering your back. And because of that, 1% does go to the NCAA because we protected you. We can't have that.
No. And like, can it be brought in on a case-by-case basis? Like that has to be established too. I also think, again, is anything that gets the NCAA less involved, I'm in favor of. But I do think big overhanging thing in all of this, because it will be how they decide to pass this buck, is the judge also has a really hard job in trying to pass something that probably encapsulates all of college, including conferences, not just NCAA. Because otherwise, like it's mentioned in there very briefly, college football playoff already separate. But you have to stop the conferences from just going, oh, so if we split up, then no one can police us either. Because that's not the goal in getting rid of the NCAA. It's not to have 5 NCAAs. It's
correct.
It's to get more common sense in there. But that said, Zach, go Cougs. I think I'll leave that here.
Walter Clayton Jr. is too good. He's so good, man. We just need him to shoot the ball every time and not give it to his tall white guys who can't hit free throws. Don't let them screw you over. Just have them set picks, throw some elbows, create some space to jack up 3-pointers. That's all we're looking for tonight. We need a good game. We need a physical game. We need some flashy plays. And Florida's the flashy team.
And speaking of white guys who can't get it done, Cooper Flagg, washed. Where's his NIL money? Does he have to return it now?
No kidding. You promised us a national championship, Coop. Like, you not only did you let Knipple down, not only did you let us down, let yourself down. You let your country down. And hey, once a loser, always a loser. Might as well stay at Duke because, boy, you fit in. Don't even go to the league.
You and Grayson Allen both.
Ugh.
I haven't forgotten you.
8 Plumleys.
Great. All right, let's end there. We got a Plumlee reference. I think that's about as good as it gets.
Yeah, we'll be back next week, and we'll talk about the aftermath of us destroying the NCAA here, and really calling them out. We'll be back next week, same time, same place. See you then. Bye.